I paid off my parents' mortgage and legally owned the house, but they insisted it was still their place, changed the lock, and let my brother move in. So I evicted them and sold the house for $300,000 profit. I'm 26 now. But this part of the story starts when I was 19. Back then, I lived with my parents, Ronald and Cassandra, my older brother Ben, and my younger sister Abby. I worked part-time doing small electrical jobs and whatever handyman work the neighbors needed. In my house, though, none of that counted. I was already the guy who fixed anything that broke, picked up after everyone and ran errands without being asked. Ben graduated college that year. The degree wasn't useful, but you wouldn't know that from the celebration. Cassandra rented a whole banquet hall, hired a photographer, ordered a giant cake, and decorated the place like Ben had just won an award for saving the country. I didn't even get to sit with the family. I spent half the day adjusting lights, moving tables, and taking photos. Because you're good with cameras, Annie, you know how these things work. Ben walked around in a suit he didn't buy, shaking hands and smiling like the whole world was waiting for him to take over. Ronald kept introducing him to people as our future leader and telling everyone that Ben was destined for success. I carried trays, cleaned spills, and ran to the store twice because Cassandra wanted different napkins. I didn't complain. At that age, I still believed helping was normal. The party cost around $5,000. They didn't hide it either. Cassandra bragged about it to anyone who would listen. I remember standing near the back wall holding the camera strap, watching Ben get another round of applause for a degree he barely scraped through. Cassandra hugged him again while telling him how proud she was. No one even said my name the entire night unless they needed something moved. 2 months later, Abby graduated high school. The celebration wasn't as massive, but it still looked like a commercial. Ronald bought her a used car with a big bow on top, and Cassandra filled the backyard with decorations and catered food. Abby sat in the center like some celebrity while people handed her envelopes and gifts. She didn't even look at half of them. I parked the car they bought her because she didn't know how to handle the driveway's curve. The car didn't last either. It was always having problems, and somehow that became another reason I was expected to drive her everywhere. That same weekend, I graduated too, a year later than I was supposed to. Between working, getting dragged into family responsibilities, and missing credits, I ended up finishing late. They didn't forget, but the attention was different. We had dinner at a small diner near home because we're tight on money after everything for Ben and Abby. Ronald ordered the cheapest items on the menu and reminded me halfway through my fries that I needed to start thinking ahead since I wasn't going to college like Ben. Cassandra said she believed in me, but she said it the way people talk about someone who needs to be managed. After that, my role became more obvious. If the sink leaked, I fixed it. If something electrical flickered, they yelled my name before trying a switch. Every year tax season came around and Ronald pushed a stack of papers in my direction because you're better with numbers. The law and my responsibility from age 14 onward, even though Ben was older and Abby was capable of pushing a mower. Even when the car was running, Abby refused to drive herself anywhere unless it was to pick up her friends. So I became her chauffeur. Ben left messes everywhere. Plates, clothes, half-finished projects, and somehow they all ended up in my hands. Cassandra would say, "Just help your brother, he's stressed." Or, "Ben has a lot on his mind right now," even though he barely lifted a finger in the house. Ronald didn't say much. If anything, he acted like this was all expected, like my role was built in from birth. I never heard a thank you, but I heard plenty of instructions. One afternoon, while fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, I overheard Cassandra talking to her sister in the living room. They thought I couldn't hear through the doorway. Cassandra said, "Oh, we don't worry about Matthew. He's like a rock. You pile anything on him and he stays put. But Ben needs guidance. He needs our attention. He's sensitive." I sat there holding a screwdriver staring at the cabinet door. That was the first time it clicked in a way I couldn't ignore. They didn't see me as a person with needs or limits. I was a tool, a backup generator, the thing that keeps running no matter how much you drain it. After high school, I went straight into trade work. I picked electrical because I already understood most of it from fixing everything at home. By the time I was 21, I was making steady, decent money. Long days, early mornings, but it felt good to have something that was mine. I paid for my tools, my truck, my own clothes. No one bought me anything. That part never bothered me. What did bother me was how fast my income became everybody else's problem, but mine. It started small. Ronald would come into my room holding the electric bill like it was a court summons. "We're short this month. Can you take care of it?" He said it like I was already supposed to know the answer. Cassandra followed a few days later with a grocery list and the same tone. Groceries are crazy expensive right now. Can you spot us until next week? I didn't argue. I worked full-time? They didn't. I figured helping was normal. Then Ben's car insurance came up. He hadn't kept a job longer than 2 months since graduation, but he acted like the world owed him patience. Cassandra slid the bill across the kitchen table toward me. Ben's looking for new work. He just needs a little support right now. Ben didn't even look up from his phone. He just said, "I'll pay you back once I'm settled," which meant never. Then Abby announced she wanted to go on a wellness retreat. Something about stress and needing to heal her energy. Ronald looked straight at me when she brought it up like the funding had already been approved. They didn't even pretend it was optional. Cassandra kept saying it was important for Abby's mental state, even though Abby spent most days on her bed scrolling through her phone. Anytime I tried to save money for myself, something came up at home. A pipe burst, a tire went flat, or someone had unexpected expenses. Funny how none of those emergencies happened unless I had a little extra saved. I'd just get ahead and suddenly Cassandra would show up with a bill. Ronald would hint about overdue payments, or Ben would mention his card was declined again. It wasn't luck. It was a pattern. I didn't need a therapist to explain it. 1 month, the roof started leaking after a storm. Ronald said they'd call someone eventually, but they didn't call anyone. They waited until the ceiling stain spread, then turned to me. "You should handle it," Ronald said. "You know this stuff." I didn't know roofing, but I figured it out. I climbed up there, tore off damaged shingles, replaced plywood, fixed the flashing, and sealed everything. Then I bought all the materials myself, because Ronald and Cassandra weren't sure when they'd be able to pay me back. They never paid me back. Around this time, Clover started dating Ben. She was friendly the first time I met her, but Cassandra immediately treated her like royalty. "She's perfect for Ben," she kept saying. "He deserves someone who makes life easier." It wasn't subtle. It was one of those comments meant to make me feel like I wasn't pulling my weight despite the fact I was the only one paying for anything. Clover didn't really talk to me. She treated me like background furniture. Ben acted proud like landing her was some achievement. Cassandra practically glowed every time Clover came over offering her drinks, food, anything she wanted. Meanwhile, I was in the garage, rewiring a broken outlet Ronald had overloaded again. One night, I sat down and added everything up. Electric bills, grocery runs, random repairs, car insurance, Abby's retreat roof materials, gas money, and all the small things they treated as my responsibility. It came out to just under $30,000. $30,000 into a house I didn't own, for people who didn't thank me, didn't ask politely, and didn't care if I had my own life. I stared at the number for a long time. No anger, no panic, just clarity. The next morning, I packed a small bag, 2 pairs of work pants, a few shirts, my boots, and my basic tools. I didn't slam doors or announce anything. I didn't yell or throw guilt back at them. I just walked out the door and drove away. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I wasn't staying there another day. When I left, I drove until the state lines changed twice. I didn't plan anything besides getting distance. I found a cheap month-to-month rental in a quiet town and set up a P.O. box so my parents wouldn't know my actual address. I didn't cut contact completely, but I kept it low enough that they couldn't drag me back into anything. I found steady work fast. Tradespeople were in high demand and I wasn't picky. If it paid, I took it. Electrical jobs, small renovations, commercial repairs, anything. Within a year, I wasn't just working jobs, I was running them. I picked up extra certifications, bought better tools, and worked every hour someone would pay me for. Some weeks, I hit 80 hours without noticing. It didn't bother me. I was finally working for myself and no one else. Once I had enough saved, I bought a rundown property on the edge of town. It looked terrible from the street, overgrown yard, cracked driveway, peeling siding, but the bones were solid. I spent months renovating it after work, doing everything myself, rewiring, flooring, drywall, roofing. By the time I finished, it looked like a completely different house. I sold it for a good profit and bought another one. That became my pattern work: renovate, sell, repeat. The money came slow at first, then faster. I built a routine that didn't depend on anyone. Every dollar I earned stayed with me. Every hour I worked made my life better instead of holding someone else's up. I didn't have to pick up after Ben or fix Ronald's mistakes or figure out Abby's problems. The quiet in my new house felt strange at first, but it didn't take long to get used to it. Holidays were the only time I heard from them. Ronald called that first Thanksgiving pretending to check in, but it turned into a guilt speech. He said families don't abandon each other, even though that's exactly what they'd been doing to me for years. Cassandra tried a softer angle on Christmas, telling me I was drifting from the family and that Ben missed me. I knew that wasn't true because Ben never called once. Abby called a few times the first year, mostly to complain. She said she dropped out of college because it was too rigid and was now studying spiritual healing, whatever that meant. Then she asked why I didn't come home to help her with money or transportation. I ignored those requests. Eventually, the pattern became predictable. I'd answer one call every couple of months just to keep the peace. Ronald would mention something about bills. Cassandra would sigh loudly in the background. Abby would talk about energy crystals or meditation. That was the cycle. Then there was Ben. The only updates I got about him came from Cassandra. He wasn't working again. Clover was pregnant again. They were living with my parents temporarily. Ronald said they were figuring things out, which meant nothing had changed. 5 years went by like that, working, saving, renovating, no chaos, no tension, no random emergencies that magically appeared when I had money saved. I finally had a quiet life with a stable business. I had employees. I had actual days where I didn't think about anybody back home. Then the call came. I saw Ronald's name pop up on my phone late on a Wednesday night. I almost let it ring out, but something told me to answer. When I picked up, he wasn't calm or composed. He was crying so hard he could barely get words out. "Matthew, we're in trouble. We're going to lose the house." I didn't say anything for a moment. He kept talking fast, voice breaking. According to him, they'd fallen behind on mortgage payments for months. The bank had already sent notices. Foreclosure was in progress. They had 6 weeks before the sheriff posted the final eviction. I heard Cassandra in the background sobbing loudly and saying, "Call him again! Tell him we need him!" Ronald tried to steady his voice. "Matthew, please. You have to come home. We need you. The family needs you. Be a good son." There it was. The phrase that always came out when they wanted something. Be a good son. I didn't answer right away. Ronald filled the silence with more begging, more panic, more explanations about how they tried their best, and Ben couldn't find stable work, and Abby wasn't in a position to contribute. They had no plan, no money, no direction, just a demand wrapped in desperation. I didn't agree to anything on the spot, but the call made one thing clear. The life I built was stable. Their lives were collapsing, and now they expected me to fix everything again. I drove back to my parents' house 3 days after Ronald's call. I didn't abandon my business to do it. I had a foreman I trusted, and by that point, my crew could run jobs without me breathing down their necks. I handed off the schedule, stayed available by phone, and took a temporary leave because this wasn't a visit. It was a takeover. The street looked smaller than I remembered. The house looked worse. When I walked inside, Cassandra rushed me immediately, crying loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She grabbed my arm like she expected me to fall apart with her. Ronald hovered behind her, wringing his hands. Abby stood near the hallway staring at her phone, pausing only long enough to say, "Finally." I didn't hug anyone. I didn't comment on the mess. I just said, "Where's the paperwork from the bank?" That set the tone. No warmth, no reunion, just business. Ronald led me to the dining table, which was covered in unopened mail, final notices, warnings, letters from the bank, everything they should have dealt with months ago. I skimmed through the stack. They weren't lying. 6 weeks was the max estimate. Cassandra kept saying, "We're losing everything, Matthew. Everything. Your childhood home." She said it like I hadn't been the one holding the place together half my life. I sat down, put the papers in order, and said the sentence that changed the entire direction of the day. "I'll pay the arrears and I'll pay the mortgage off in full," I said. "But I'm not giving away that kind of money for free." Cassandra froze. Ronald blinked at me like he didn't understand the words. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, "if I save this house, I become the owner fully legally." No arguments later. "That means I'm clearing the bank's lien and putting the home in my name when the payoff posts." Cassandra's voice shot up immediately. "Matthew, how can you even say that? This is our home. You can't just steal it." I didn't respond. I opened my folder and placed a set of documents on the table. A quitclaim deed to transfer title, a purchase agreement showing I was paying off the loan, my lawyer's card. I didn't raise my voice or push them. I just slid the papers forward. Cassandra slapped her hand on the table. "You brought a lawyer. You think we're strangers. We're your parents." Ronald backed her up. "This is disrespectful, Matthew, treating family like a transaction." Abby rolled her eyes like she was bored. "This is manipulative. You planned this. Who brings legal documents to their own parents?" She didn't even look up from her phone for half of it. I ignored the outbursts. "It's simple. You want the house saved. I'm willing to save it. But I'm not giving the bank 6 figures just to watch everyone mismanage it again. If I pay for it, I own it. The bank still has a lien, so this only works one way. I pay the loan off in full at closing, and the deed transfers to me same day. Cassandra covered her face and started crying harder, talking about betrayal and how she didn't raise me to be like this. Ronald went into a speech about loyalty and duty. Abby accused me of acting like a landlord over my own family. They didn't argue the numbers, they didn't deny the foreclosure, they didn't offer another solution, they just attacked the idea of me having control. That told me everything. Eventually, Ronald ran out of excuses. Cassandra ran out of tears. Abby left the room. They didn't want to sign, but they didn't have another option. Ben wasn't earning anything. Abby avoided responsibility like it was a sport and they had no savings. So they signed. My lawyer also had them sign a basic month-to-month lease after the transfer rules in writing no confusion later. Cassandra cried through the entire thing. Ronald looked defeated. Abby muttered something about karma. I didn't react. Once the signatures were on paper, I gathered the documents, called my lawyer, and said, "It's done." When the legal part was handled, I went to inspect the house. It was worse than I expected. The living room had stains in the carpet big enough to outline a small animal. Crayon drawings covered the hallway walls. Ben's kid, obviously. A corner of the ceiling had water damage from the leak I fixed years ago, only worse now. I checked the bathrooms. Mold. Black patches spreading behind the toilet and along the tiles. The bathtub drain was clogged with something I didn't want to identify. Abby's old room was a disaster. Piles of clothes, half-burned candles, broken jewelry, empty cups, and notebooks with scribbles about energy fields. I didn't touch anything. Ben and Clover's stuff was all over the house: boxes, bags, toys, shoes, wrappers. They treated the place like a hotel room with a cleaning staff. I stood in the hallway and looked at everything with one thought running through my head. This wasn't a home. This was a sinking ship patched with duct tape and excuses. But now it was my sinking ship. I spent the rest of the day taking photos, writing notes, and planning. The renovation wouldn't be small, it wouldn't be cheap, it wouldn't be quick. But it would be mine. 6 figures at minimum months of work, most of it done by me. And unlike every project in my childhood, none of these repairs were optional. The house was falling apart. They let it happen. Now I had to rebuild it, not for them, not for nostalgia, for ownership, for control, for a future that wasn't chained to chaos. Once the paperwork was finalized and the mortgage was paid off, I started the renovation. I treated it like a full-scale job site. No shortcuts, no patchwork, no putting things off. The house needed more than repairs. It needed rebuilding from the inside out. The first 2 weeks were demolition. I ripped up old carpet, removed rotten baseboards, and tore out the sagging kitchen cabinets. Underneath everything was water damage, mold patches, and cheap fixes Ronald had done years earlier that barely held anything together. I kept working sunrise to sundown. Ben didn't lift a finger. Most mornings he was already on the couch gaming by the time I started hauling debris to the dumpster. His headset stayed glued to his ears. He acted annoyed when I passed through the living room carrying tools. Clover sat beside him most days, scrolling through her phone or giving me comments about the house layout like she was the project manager. "You shouldn't knock down that wall," Clover would say. "It closes the space." Or the kitchen needs softer colors, something warm for the family. She said family like the house belonged to her. Abby was no better. Her room was next to mine. And every time I used a power tool, she came out complaining the noise was messing with her energy healing sessions. She'd wave her hands around like she was pushing invisible air and say she needed quiet time to recharge. The first major project was the roof. I tore off every old shingle, replaced the damaged plywood, and installed a brand new system. After that came the HVAC. The old unit rattled like a dying engine. I put in a modern system with better ventilation and zoning. Ronald stood next to me while I worked, acting like he understood it all. "I would have done that years ago," he said once, arms crossed. "Just needed the right timing." Cassandra chimed in whenever she could. "Make sure you leave room in the kitchen for the island, but not too big, and don't block the walkway. And Ben needs space to prepare snacks." She said it like Ben actually used the kitchen. When I installed the new electrical system, Ronald felt the need to critique everything. "Those outlets are too high," he said. "Ben won't like bending down." He didn't mention that Ben hadn't moved from the couch in 4 hours. Once the structure was stable, I started on the interior. New floors throughout the house. Thick planks, clean lines, nothing cheap. The difference was immediate. The place looked cleaner already. Clover followed me room to room as if I asked for her input. "This wall should be blue. This one needs shelving. The living room needs more seating for everyone." She said it confidently like she owned the house. I reminded her once I'm rebuilding this place, please don't touch the tools. She didn't listen. The biggest project was the master suite, the only space I built entirely for myself. I used high-quality materials, insulated the walls, installed a reinforced door and a secure lock. It wasn't huge, but it was clean, quiet, and completely under my control. The only room in the entire house where no one else was allowed. I posted one rule for the entire renovation, and I said it clearly so there were no misunderstandings. Keep the common areas clean. That was it. No chores, no heavy lifting, just basic respect. They ignored it immediately. Ben left food wrappers and cups wherever he sat. Clover spread her things across counters and tables. Abby's crystals, candles, and journals were everywhere. Ronald and Cassandra treated the kitchen like a drop zone for whatever they didn't want to put away. Instead of helping, they acted like supervisors. "Don't put the island there," Cassandra said. "Ben needs more space in the pantry. Abby needs a meditation corner by the window." None of them asked what I wanted. None acknowledged I was the only one rebuilding the structure beneath their feet. They spoke with certainty, like the house was still theirs, like my decisions were temporary suggestions they could override. The entitlement didn't just stay at comments. One afternoon, I walked in from the hardware store and overheard Ben saying, "Matthew only owns the house on paper. Mom and Dad won't let him do anything big. He knows better." Clover nodded. "He's too soft to kick anyone out." Abby added her own version to Clover later. "He acts tough, but he won't actually move us. He's not built like that." They said it casually, as if I wasn't even in the conversation, as if I was weak for not exploding or threatening them. I stood in the hallway listening. They didn't stop. They didn't lower their voices. They assumed I wouldn't do anything. I didn't respond. I didn't call them out. I didn't correct them. I just kept working. I poured close to $200,000 into a house everyone treated like a vacation rental. And every day, their entitlement got louder. I kept my silence. They mistook it for weakness. Clover had already been around the house constantly. But the day she moved her suitcases in, Cassandra announced it like it was a community decision. "She'll just stay until the baby comes," she said, patting Clover's arm as if she were welcoming royalty. Clover didn't wait for permission. She walked straight inside, dropped her bags in the hallway, and made herself at home. From the moment she settled in, she acted like the house belonged to her. She walked through the rooms, slowly studying everything I'd built, pointing out things she wanted changed. The next morning, she came to me while I was checking measurements in the kitchen. "The master suite is way too big for one person," she said. "You should move your stuff to the basement. It makes more sense for a family to have that space." She said it calmly, like she was discussing the weather, not asking me to vacate the only room in the house I had kept private. I didn't answer her. I just kept looking at my notes. She took my silence as hesitation. "The baby needs room," she added. "You'll be fine downstairs." Later that afternoon, Ronald pulled me aside in the living room. "Son, don't be selfish," he said. "They have a child on the way. Clover needs comfort." He spoke like this was already decided. Cassandra followed. "Think of the family," she said. "You're young, you don't need that much space." It was interesting hearing them talk about space as if they'd paid for any of it. They'd spent years letting the place fall apart. I was the one who rebuilt it board by board, dollar by dollar. But none of that mattered when they wanted something. The pressure didn't stop there. The small aggressions started piling up fast. My tools, which I always kept organized, began disappearing. I'd find them in random rooms outside on the porch or shoved into drawers where they didn't belong. Clover said she borrowed them for a project, but she never said what project that was. Groceries didn't last 2 days anymore. I'd fill the fridge in the morning, and by the end of the night, half the food was gone. Ben ate most of it without thinking, grabbing whatever he wanted while yelling at his game. Clover helped herself to everything else, claiming pregnancy cravings as an excuse. Abby went through my snacks because spiritual healers need clean energy sources. Laundry wasn't safe either. Whenever I left clothes in the washer, Abby would pull them out mid-cycle and throw them onto the floor so she could wash her delicates. She acted like it was my fault for not babysitting the machine. Every day felt tighter, smaller. No matter what I did, someone found a way to step over my boundaries. I got used to opening drawers and finding my things missing. I got used to food disappearing faster than I could replace it. I got used to Clover giving orders like she owned the deed. But the line I drew, the one place I didn't allow chaos, was the master suite. That room was mine. I built it, paid for it, and designed it to stay untouched. No one was allowed inside. The lock was there for a reason. One night after a 14-hour shift on a commercial job site, I came home dead tired. My hands were sore, my clothes were covered in drywall dust, and all I wanted was a shower and sleep. I walked down the hall toward my suite, ready to shut the door and disconnect. Before I reached it, I heard laughter from inside. Not just any laughter, relaxed, comfortable, settled laughter. Clover's voice, Ben's voice, and the sound of the TV playing something loudly. I stopped, looked at the door, tried the key. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. They had changed the lock. I could tell they didn't do it carefully either. The hardware was scuffed and the frame had fresh marks like Ben had muscled it and called it good enough. My hand stayed on the doorknob for a few seconds, while the noise inside continued. Clover talking about paint colors, Ben joking about taking the big room, and the sound of someone unpacking bags. I stepped back and looked at the door. They hadn't asked. They hadn't warned me. They didn't even pretend to respect the one boundary I'd set. Cassandra appeared behind me in the hallway as if she'd been waiting. "Don't make this dramatic," she said. "It's our house. Clover needs the space. You'll understand when you're a parent." Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was irritated, like I was being unreasonable for wanting access to my own room. Ronald appeared a moment later and nodded at her words. Abby peeked from the end of the hall, smirking like she had predicted this exact outcome. None of them looked ashamed. None looked concerned. They all acted like swapping my lockout and taking my private room was normal. I didn't argue. There was no point. Arguing would only feed their belief that the house still belonged to them. I wasn't going to beg for what I already owned. I looked at the door one more time, not because I was unsure, but because something inside me shifted quietly, cleanly. My voice didn't rise, my hands didn't shake, my chest didn't tighten. I just went silent. Not the kind of silence that came from exhaustion, the kind that comes right before a decision, a final one. When I left the hallway that night after Cassandra told me it was their house and Clover needed the space, I didn't say anything. I didn't sleep either. I stayed in my truck for a while, just letting the engine idle while I stared through the windshield. I eventually went inside only to grab clean clothes and a shower. I walked toward the master suite to see if maybe someone had come to their senses. They hadn't. Instead, everything that belonged to me, every personal thing I had kept organized in that room, was dumped in the hallway like trash. My work clothes were scattered across the carpet. My toolbox was open, half the sockets missing. My PC case had a dent in the side panel. My safe, which weighed enough that no one should have been touching it, was sitting crooked against the wall with scratches across the top. Someone had clearly dragged it out. I stood there looking at the mess, and there wasn't any shock left in me. No anger, no disbelief. They had already broken the lock on my room. This was just the next step. The master suite door opened. Ben walked out wearing my robe, drinking from my cup, and stretching like he'd had the best sleep of his life. He smirked when he saw me. "Relax, man. Mom and Dad said it's their house. Couch won't kill you." He said it like he was sharing good advice, like I was the one being dramatic for wanting access to the room I built and paid for. I didn't answer him. I just stepped around my scattered things, walked into my old room, what used to be my room, grabbed a duffel bag and packed what mattered: a few clothes, documents, small essentials. Everything else stayed where it was. Before leaving, I took photos, all of it, every mess, every damaged item, every violation, not for nostalgia, for evidence. I walked out of the house without telling anyone. Ronald called after me once asking where I was going, but I didn't answer. I drove straight to a hotel on the other side of town, paid for a week up front, and sat on the bed with my phone in my hand. Then I called my lawyer. I explained everything. The lock change, the property damage, the takeover of the master suite, the displacement, the ongoing disruptions. He didn't hesitate. "We'll move forward immediately," he said. "You have full ownership and a signed lease agreement with your parents. They've breached it." For the first time in a long time, something felt simple. 2 days later, the paperwork started moving. I came back on a Thursday evening with everything my lawyer could do, fast. Not the eviction itself, but the first step that made it inevitable. Through the window, I could see them at the dinner table laughing like nothing had happened. Ronald carving something, Cassandra pouring drinks, Clover eating like she owned the kitchen. Ben talking loud about some online tournament, Abby scrolling while she chewed. I walked in without knocking. The table went quiet for a second, not from guilt, just surprise. Cassandra forced a smile. "Matthew, sweetheart, grab a plate." I put an envelope in front of Ronald and Cassandra. "Notice of termination?" Ronald skimmed it, then slammed it down. "You're evicting your own parents. Are you insane?" Before the shouting could build, I placed more papers on the table, one in front of Ben, one in front of Clover, one in front of Abby. Notices to vacate. Unauthorized occupancy. Ben stood so fast his chair scraped. "You're kidding!" Clover's face pinched. I'm pregnant. You can't do this, Abby snapped. You have no soul. And Cassandra started in with the same line she always used when she wanted control back. This is our home. Our home. I stayed calm. You changed my lock. You dumped my property in the hallway. You damaged my things. You violated the agreement. This isn't a debate. It's notice. Ben stepped toward me. We're not leaving. I didn't step back. Then you'll explain that to a judge. I walked out while the yelling chased me to the door. The next few weeks, they didn't leave because of course they didn't. They treated the papers like a tantrum, something they could ignore until I got tired and folded. So my lawyer filed. There was a court date, then another step, then the ruling. They showed up acting offended like the whole thing was a misunderstanding and I was just being dramatic over a room. They tried guilt. They tried tears. They tried anger. None of it mattered. The judge looked at the deed, the signed agreement, the photos, the lock change, the property damage, and then it became simple. Judgment granted. Writs issued. Set out day. The sheriff came on the scheduled day not as a surprise, not as a threat, as the final step. He posted the notice. He explained the timeline. He gave them the last window to move what they could move. Inside the house, it was instant chaos. Cassandra cried loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Ronald argued like volume could change paperwork. Abby stuffed things into bags while complaining about energy. Clover paced the yard on the phone, telling anyone who would listen that I had destroyed her future. Ben stomped around grabbing electronics first like priorities were a joke. None of them packed like people who believed consequences were real. I stood by my truck, not gloating, just watching the process finish. Ben eventually came out to me crying for real now, voice breaking. Please, man, he said, please don't do this. My mom and dad are kind of homeless now. Clover's stressed out. The baby, everything is messed up. We got nowhere to go. You can't leave us like this. I looked at him and felt nothing sharp anymore, just finished. Ben, I said, try getting a job. He collapsed into tears like the floor had dropped out from under him. I walked past him without another word. The sheriff finished his part. The locks were changed. The house was quiet. I cleaned up what I needed to clean. I contacted a realtor. Within weeks, I had an offer I couldn't ignore. The closing took longer, but when it finally cleared, it was far more than I'd put into it. When the final payment cleared, I sat in my truck and scrolled through the list of contacts I'd spent half my life trying to satisfy: Ronald, Cassandra, Abby, Ben, Clover. One by one, I blocked them. Right before the last block, Ronald sent a final text. Son, come home. We can fix this. Blocked as well. That was the end.